Okay, welcome everybody. I think people are starting to be let in to our webinar. Thank you for joining us for our annual presentation on applying for capital funding to the Manhattan Borough President's Office. I think people are starting to come in. We're going to be recording this, so we'll be posting a link to it on our website in the coming days as well. So, as well as sending everyone the presentations, etc. So I'm going to start off with some introductions here, and then we'll get going on the presentation. And we're going to really try our best to keep it to an hour at max. So my name is Amy Slattery. I am the budget director for the Manhattan Borough President. This is, I guess we're going on our fourth budget cycle. So if you're not new to the process, you've likely met with us before, but if you are new, we look forward to, talking to you in the coming months about your potential projects. So I'm going to pass it on to my coworker Nelson to introduce himself, and then we'll just kind of do a round of the other agency reps as well.
Hello, I'm Nelson, Amy's co-worker deputy at the Borough President's Office. Welcome, everyone. Next, Maite. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maite Cariño, and I'm the Capital Projects and Budget Analyst.
Okay, so that's the budget team. Let's turn it over to OMB next. Zalan.
Hello, how are you doing, everybody? My name is Zalan Charles. I am Deputy Assistant Counsel at OMB, and I will be assisting with the CAP Grants portal and CAP Grants review for the next cycle. And with me on this call is Tyler Prime, if you want to introduce yourself, Tyler.
Thanks, Zalan. Yeah, I work with Zalan, Deputy Counsel at OMB. Looking forward to working with you all.
Okay, so let's DDC, you're up.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. David Baroli, Deputy Commissioner and General Counsel for the Department of Design and Construction, DDC, which may not make sense to you at this point if you've not done this before in the past, but my colleague Josh Lambe is with me, and if there are questions later, we can address it, but you're going to hear this one theme from us. Please look at our website. All the information you need from us is there, but looking forward to today's session.
And I'm Joshua Lambe. I'm the Deputy Director of the DDC's Nonprofit Reimbursement Program. So our unit reviews all the project submissions and just reviews everything for accuracy and eligibility. And then from there, we work with OMB to make sure everything, gets approved.
Okay, EDC.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Josh Altschuler. I'm a Vice President in EDC's Funding Agreements Department. Hopefully get to work with some of you soon, funding recipients. So EDC manages some of the real property projects that are selected through the CAP grants process. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the who, what, where, when, why on our funding agreements process.
Sarah at DCLA.
Hi, my name is Sarah Menard. I am Director of the Capital Unit at the Department of Cultural Affairs. We are the funding agency for which eligible organizations can request capital funding for cultural projects. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And HPD, do you want to say hi?
Hey, this is Bobby from HPD's Division of Capital Planning. Apologies for the late arrival. Encountered some technical difficulties, but our division manages Resolution A applications for housing-related projects.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we're all here and we'll get going. I'll run through the agenda just real quickly. I'm going to go through some basic capital funding guidelines for nonprofit organizations and city agencies, although to be honest, the bulk of this presentation really is geared towards the nonprofit and cap grants process. City agencies, it's a very different process, very simple. It's an application just directly on our website. If there's questions towards the end that anybody that would be applying either for an agency or behalf of an agency, please, drop them in the Q&A. But again, we're going to be focusing mainly on the nonprofit application process, which is cap grants, and we have our own process for that. We're then going to turn it over and hear from OMB, who's going to do a brief presentation, followed by EDC, the Economic Development Court, on their process, as they just mentioned. And then we'll leave a good amount for some questions and answers that you can just drop in the Q&A. And we will try to get through as many of those as we can. All right? Okay. Without further ado. Okay, so these are the capital funding baseline requirements. Not all of them, but these are some, highlights of some of the major ones. One, you have to be a non-for-profit organization under New York State law and registered to do business in New York State. You have to, in order to be able to apply for capital funding from the city, you have to have existing city operating contracts. So for real property applications, which we're going to give some, or requests, I should say, we'll give some examples of those. You need to have pre-existing city contracts for operating, which is expense funds, for the previous 3 fiscal years, which in this case is FY25, FY24, and FY23, of $50,000 in each of those years. For movable property, it's a little less of a requirement of $25,000 in the previous fiscal year. You have to have an operating history, and you need to be able to demonstrate that you have the financial resources to be able to support the capital project throughout its useful life. The property in question must be owned and has to be used by the funding recipients. That can be kind of a big sticking point for nonprofits that want to apply for capital improvements to spaces that they don't own. So we can talk a little bit more about that. And then the request itself has to be a capital asset as defined by generally accepted accounting principles. Okay, so here are just some types of eligible projects. Real property, as we mentioned before, would be acquisition of a property, construction or reconstruction of land, building, and fixtures. Movable property is equipment or furniture that is not attached to real property, or it is very minimally attached to real property, or vehicles. And vehicles are very common capital requests to our office. Some examples of these are land and building acquisition and renovations, theater renovations or equipment purchases, HVAC systems, vehicle purchases, or initial outfitting of new spaces. To be eligible, considered an eligible project, there must be a city purpose for the project, and there must be a defined city use throughout the life of the project, the useful life of the project. A useful life is defined as a minimum period of time depending on what the type of capital project is. So for instance, equipment, that's generally 3 to 5 years. For construction renovation, that tends to be anywhere between 10 and 30 years. So short-term improvements, for instance, wouldn't fall under the definition of a capital or an eligible capital project. The project must meet all the directives of the New York City Comptroller's Office. And again, the recipient organization must demonstrate the financial and administrative ability to be able to complete, support, and operate the project. So sometimes this comes up for smaller nonprofit organizations, maybe with smaller operating budgets. They might have a great need for perhaps a new renovation or new construction of a space, but they don't have the operating funds to be able to manage that space after it's built. That would be a red flag that OMB would look very closely at and try to get more information about the ability of the organization to actually operate it once it's done. Okay, next. So these are important. There is a minimum for requests. Real property projects, the request has to be a minimum, and again, real property is land and buildings, of $500,000. Movable property, there's a minimum of $50,000, except for an initial outfitting. That's sort of a one-time exception. Minimally attached projects, it's $250,000, and we just like to note that construction projects, renovation projects, should have a 15% contingency in their budget. There's also maximums that that an organization can request. So for movable property, an organization could ask for 100%, but for real property, according to the guidelines, a nonprofit can ask for up to 90% of the first $2 million of the cost of the project and 50% of the portion above $2 million. So if there's a specific question about that, we'll be happy to go through it. Next. Just some other things to point out. Private schools are only eligible to apply when 100% of their students are special education students whose tuition is being paid for by the Department of Education. This is very important. Funds are only on a reimbursement basis and after a funding agreement is executed and registered by the comptroller. So an organization can incur expenses before that, but you're on the hook for those expenses. And again, the city will only reimburse for eligible costs incurred after the date of the city appropriation, in which case we're talking about fiscal 26, which begins on July 1 of 2025. And the city will not fund recipients that have not complied with any prior agreement. So if you've come to the city for a capital request before and that project is either still ongoing or it's closed out, but you haven't submitted all the necessary paperwork and other information that the city's requesting, then a new request can't be considered. Okay. So there are exceptions to the things I just said. Housing applications, specifically projects in NYCHA and housing projects that are that fall under a housing loan program with HPD are not subject to those exact guidelines. And if there are some organizations that are considering doing a housing related application, we do have HPD available here to answer some specific questions. And also cultural organizations. The operating funds requirement is different if you're a cultural organization, and you only have to have received funding from DCLA in the previous year. But again, you should always be in contact with DCLA about cultural projects because they have their own process and they review all of their own applications and approve them. Here's just some examples of ineligible items. The first one is probably the most common one that we have to let organizations know, and that's lease payments are not considered eligible. Routine maintenance or demolition, fundraising, title insurance also not considered eligible. Warranties, disposable or consumable items, mostly because those just won't meet the useful life requirement and the minimum dollar threshold to be considered a capital asset. Same thing with inventory. There can't be custom made project or construction, for instance, with decals and logos, and that's just in case the city has to come back and take over the property or the equipment in question. It can't be anything that's been, custom fabricated. Software subscriptions generally are not considered eligible, but there is a little bit of wiggle room there. But the other kind of our final bullet point about funding won't be provided to startup organizations. Again, that has to do with being able to show an operating history, or organizations with no current or full-time paid staff, and there can be no religious activity. It's common for religious organizations to want to request capital funding from the city, and there are ways that those projects can be eligible, but it's a very, very complicated process that we have to go through. So certainly in that case, you'll want to request a meeting with us. Okay, so on that note, how does an organization apply to our office for capital funding? All nonprofits must complete the same application, which is on OMB's website, and it's called CAP Grants. And we have a link to the webpage where you can find that. So you should right away, you should start to set up an account on CAP Grants, and you should start to familiarize yourself with the process, because it is a very lengthy one. And there's a lot of information that needs to be completed and attachments, and it's a very thorough process. So this is definitely not something you want to leave to the last minute. You should be already starting to work on it at this point if you haven't already. You should submit the application. And the deadline this year, I believe, is either February 20th or the 21st of 2025. Generally,
Hi,
Tyler, were you gonna
jumping
say
in.
something?
Yep. For applications to borough presidents, it's February 20th this year.
February 20th, right. Okay. At 5 p.m. And I'll talk a little bit about when an organization is applying to both the council and the borough presidents, but since we're doing this presentation as the borough president's office, I'm going to generally just refer to our deadline, which is always the earlier deadline of February 20th. So you'll want to make sure that you submit that application no later than that deadline, obviously, because if it's not submitted, there's no exceptions. It can't be reviewed. It's not, and it's not our deadline necessarily, it's the city's deadline. So we're unable to make exceptions. And the earlier that you do submit it, if there are bits of missing information or questions that OMB or whatever relevant agency is reviewing the application, and there needs to be follow-up, the earlier you submit, the more time we will have to actually do that back and forth with you. And yes, we do that back and forth with you. It comes through our office. So as you can imagine, with many applications coming in, that takes a lot of time. So the more time that we have to look at your application and request it to be reviewed, the better for you and for us. And so, yeah, so then step 3 is after the application is submitted, we can continue to work through that. We can meet with you, and I'll talk about the process of requesting a meeting with our office to talk about your project. And then we make our allocations in April, and sometimes some extra allocations in May. And then the budget, our allocations become live or real once the budget is passed as of July 1st of the new fiscal year. Okay, so the process for city agencies and schools. Sorry. On our website, we have a capital funding tab, which the web link is posted right there. If you are a city agency or a school, and we did a separate webinar on schools, so I won't spend too much time talking about schools. I'll just focus on the agencies. It is a separate application that comes just from our office. It's much more streamlined and a much easier process than CAP Grants. But again, it'll be very easy to find on our website. And we also do meetings for the schools, city agencies, and nonprofits. And you can request a meeting with us. The link is actually already live on the website. We've started setting up meetings already, and they will begin in January of 2025. And they run generally through March of that year. Okay. The application itself, I should mention, though, won't actually open until January. And the CAP grants application will probably open, I would imagine, around January 2nd, 3rd, something. Tyler, do we have a date?
Yeah, the anticipated launch is actually going to be January 6th, Monday, January 6th.
January 6th, which is that Monday, right? After the new year?
That's right.
Okay, great. Makes sense. Okay, so just some quick tips here. You should, for our purposes, you should sign up to receive our newsletter so you can get reminders and announcements about applications opening and how to set up a meeting with our office. I had mentioned before the city council. So if you have a project where you want to request funding from both the city council and the borough president, you have to submit the application by our deadline for both, because in order for us to be able to consider funding the project, it has to be received by February 20th. And since it's the same application, you have to submit it for both by our earlier deadline. And you should meet with your council member and talk to them about the project. They have their own bucket of money, and they have access to other funds through the city council speaker, for instance. So it's always a good strategy to request a certain amount from us. We have the whole borough to take care of, so just keep that in mind, whereas a council member has a smaller pot of money, but also a much smaller amount of applications to consider. So you should be reaching out to both of us. We try to fund projects together. We meet with all the council members each budget cycle to go through our requests one by one. And we really do try to support the same projects to make sure that they're able to get fully funded and move forward. Again, complete your application as early as possible. I gave you all the reasons why, but mostly just so we have ample time to go back and forth with you and to give you feedback. And also, if you do wait till the last minute, the system gets a little overburdened and can tend to crash. And so nobody needs that stress, trust me. You can take a look at our website for ideas of past projects that we've funded, and most importantly, a range of dollar amounts, so you can know, if you're a first-time applicant, what's a realistic amount to ask for from our office for a certain type of project. And you'll see we fund a slew of different projects. So chances are, whatever your request is, it's something that we funded before for a similar organization. And you can request a meeting with our office. As long as you are submitting a request for an eligible project and you are an eligible organization to receive capital funding, we will meet with you. We do pretty quick and efficient meetings. And it's a good opportunity for you to ask us questions, but also honestly for us to ask you questions, just to make sure that there aren't going to be any eligibility issues. And yeah. Some other tips. Okay, so oftentimes groups have an existing award that they need to be repurposed. If that's something that you need our office to repurpose because it's prior borough president's allocation of funding, you need to talk to us about it. We need to approve it. And we also need to actually go through the process of doing that. So make sure to reach out to us as soon as possible. You should submit only one application. I think you can submit more than one in CAP grants, but to be honest, we only have, as I mentioned, we have a limited budget and an entire borough to try to fund. So we can only consider one application per organization. And if you were able to submit two, we would consider the one that's the lowest dollar amount, to be honest with you. If you are out and about and you meet other staff from our office, maybe at a community event, and you want to talk to them about your capital application, that's great, but they're not the budget unit. So if you want real advice and real feedback and a real conversation about your application, you have to talk to the budget team. And that we are here on this call. All of our contact information will be at the end of the presentation. And as I mentioned before, you should know all of your elected officials, so you know all the different people that you can request funding from. And it's not just city representatives. Your state representatives have funding as well. It's a very different process, so you'll have to reach out to them and talk to them individually. But definitely consider everyone when you're putting in a request. So I think at this point, I'm going to pause, turn it over to Zalan at OMB to do their section of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you.
So I will attempt to share my screen. Hopefully this view is working just fine.
Yep, we can see it, Zalon.
Okay, thank you very much, Tyler. Just some clarified details, as Amy and Tyler have pointed out before. When it comes to your CAP grants application, we anticipate this portal to go live early January 6th of 2025. And when it comes to the actual documents to download and prepare for your applications, we are anticipating those to be available to non-cities and all other applicants by the week of the 23rd of this month. So we will be sending out an email to the elected officials whenever those documents are live and available, and they should contact you to let you know that you have access to download these documents. I recommend that you do that as soon as the documents are live so that the application process could go as smoothly as possible once the portal goes live. So with that preamble, whenever you visit the CAP grant site to begin your application process, you will be led here, and this will be updated as needed once we have everything ready to go. You will want to go to once you have your documents downloaded and ready to go, you will want to go to the CAP grants portal. And once we have this updated and ready to go and live, you will see a link here that will lead you to the actual portal. And once you are led to the portal, the first thing you will want to do, if this is your first time going through the CAP grants application process, you will want to register an account. On the portal, it's a very straightforward process. You just fill in the relevant fields, and then you will receive a confirmation email to verify your email address. We recommend that if you don't find it in your inbox, please check your spam and your junk folders. They may appear in those areas at times. And then once you are registered, you'll be ready to go. For anyone who has done the CAP grants process in previous fiscal years during this in this portal, your account is still available and you will not have to re-register. So once you are logged into your account, you will be led to the actual portal here. You will see submission deadlines. These will be updated as needed. As you have heard prior, for BP submissions or BP requests and then BP and council requests, that will be February 20th of 2025 by 5 p.m. So to start off your application process, you will want to first register your organization by clicking the organization tab up here, and then you will want to register a new organization. So you will click here. You will type in the name of the organization, the EIN number, and then you will access this drop-down menu to select which type of organization applies. Then you will type in this code from the image. You will select next. I will just do a test here. And then once that portion is done, you will be taken to the organization details tab, where you'll fill in some more applicable information, capital contact, address, so on and so forth. Once you hit save, you will be taken to the final portion of registering your organization, in which you will, once this loads, apologies, you will be able to submit all required documents and supplemental documents. Please note that for supplemental documents, this depends on what applies to your organization. So please pay attention while you are filling out the organization form, because that will let you know exactly which supplemental documents apply to you. So once you are done filling in and submitting all required documents and whatever supplemental documents apply, you will first want to hit save just to make sure that everything is good to go in case there's an issue. But then you will want to hit submit organization. And once you hit submit organization, you will be able to go back to the organization page, and your status as an organization should change from draft to complete, right? And then once you have your organization registered, you are not done yet. You still have to actually submit your project application. So you will want to move to the project tab, and you will select create new capital request. You will select your organization that you have just registered, and then you will type in this code here, whatever pops up. You will hit next. Then you will select the project type from this dropdown, whatever you are trying to apply for capital funding. Then you will hit next. And then you will be taken to a page where you will submit all required information for your project application, such as the title, the total funding request amount, the total cost, a description of your project. You will be able to place the project location, non-city funding, existing projects. You'll fill in these fields. The funding request amount page. This is where you will be able to detail the amount of funding specifically that you were searching for from the elected officials, the BPs, the total council funding request. Please note that if you're requesting any funding from city council, you will want to first select total council funding request, put in the total amount that you are seeking from council, even if it's one person or multiple council members, so on and so forth. You would just put the total amount that you're requesting from city council, and then you will be able to use this drop-down menu here to select which council delegations or council members you are requesting funding from specifically. And we are unfortunately having some technical difficulties with the test environment right now, but whenever you are at this page, you should be able to see required documents or supplemental documents that you will upload, and then you will hit save again and submit project. We apologize for the technical difficulties, but these are anticipated to be resolved well before the portal actually goes live. So once you are done, your status will change from draft to submitted. And at that point, you are done with your project application. Please note there's some additional information. Let's say someone else at your organization wants access to your actual organization and projects. What you will want to do is go to, if you are the person who created the organization, you will go to this right section here, and you will click Manage Access. And thankfully, Tyler has prepared an example for me. For the person who is requesting access, sorry, I'll just go back here. For the person who wants access, you will go to request access to organization, and you will type in the EIN of the registered organization on the portal. And then the person who has created the organization will receive an email notification that someone is requesting access. And then they will go to Manage Access. And then they will see your name here. And then they could just click this on under the access role. And then they'll bring up this pop-up where you could change the access to whatever you see fit, make them organization admin, save, and then that's it. Now, after your project is submitted, and when OMB is reviewing your project, indicates that there is some sort of error or more information is required, we will submit our comments, and your elected official will request additional information of you. And when that happens, you will receive an email notification that additional information was requested for your particular project. And it should send you also show you a hyperlink to lead you back to the portal, where you will view this messages column. And once you click under the messages column, What would show here is the exact additional information request that is made from you, whether that be a change to the funding amounts or a change to a certain document that you have submitted. I will try to find an example where there is one. So then once that is done, or once that additional request is made, you will come back to this project, and then you will see whatever request was made. It will be enclosed in a red box, and it will allow you to make that change as needed. Once you submit that, you will be able to then click Submit Project again. And your status should change from reopened back to submitted. And with that is everything that you need to know when it comes to the CAP Grants portal process and submitting a project. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lon. And I just wanted to point out quickly, there should be, well, both on our CAP Grants portal site, at the download site, as well as made available to you a PDF instruction guide that would bring you through each of these subparts that Zalon covered today. So hopefully that's, you know, in addition to this meeting and rewatching the recording, that PDF should be able to guide you through all these steps.
Thank you, Tyler.
Awesome. Thank you to both of you. I know that was a lot of information, but that's really kind of the crux of what the groups need to do and need to know is how to actually fill out the application. So thank you for that. And if you have specific questions, please drop them in the chat. But in the interest of time, we're going to keep moving so we have enough time for the Q&A. So we're going to pass it over to EDC now to do their presentation and impart their words of wisdom for all of us. So thank you, Josh.
Absolutely.
You should be able to screen share.
This is the right window.
Yep,
All right, great.
looks great.
Thanks. So yes, again, I work in EDC's, the New York City Economic Development Corporation's funding agreements department, and we manage in particular the real property projects, acquisitions, construction, renovations, funded through CAP grants. So really, our role is to move the funding through the city's approval process on the smoothest path possible. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about how to do that. And starting by defining a funding agreement. It's essentially the contract between the nonprofit funding recipient and EDC. It's going to spell out documentary and procedural requirements, the conditions for disbursements. Appreciate Amy, you already going over this. I may say it a couple more times even, but payments are on a reimbursement basis. So we're paying for capitally eligible work that has been performed. So what will you be, what are we doing? What are you doing? You've got this kind of visual here to show just how many stakeholders at a minimum may be involved in the funding agreements process. And so things that we'll do is we're going to provide forms and checklists. We're going to ask you to complete those forms. We're going to relay questions from different agencies. We'll explain what these forms are for and who's reviewing them, what they're used for. And essentially, we're going to try to help you as the funding recipient, prepare the materials so that they're, in line with our understanding of how the different reviewers who will be looking at them are expecting and preferring to see them. So we'll try to catch things that we understand that they will catch or ask about, and so that we can have answers ready, or that we can adjust some of the deliverables before they're even sent out. For the funding recipient, obviously, you're going to be if it's a construction project or a renovation project, you'll likely be in touch with a design team, contractor or construction manager, outside counsel who will review legal drafts. If it's an acquisition, you might be working with a seller or seller's agent, board members, consultants. So, hopefully the intention of this slide is not just to show you, sort of a lot of the consistent stakeholders, but also to sort of plant the seed of the importance of having a dedicated and really consistent point of contact or small team who can focus on this work. And the reason I say that is, you know, a lot of times we're always grateful for the opportunity to get to work with executive staff. They're excellent opportunities, but frankly, you know, the executive director of your organizations has a lot more on their plate than, you know, could you delete this sentence from the narrative, and can you fix this spreadsheet? So, you know, having somebody or a team who can really work in real time on some of these finer points can really help some of it move along really just on a faster pace. I've mentioned funding agreements process a few times. Just going to give a quick overview of that process. And again, you'll see some of the same stakeholders mentioned throughout here. Intake, I'm actually going to just briefly touch on intake on the final slide. It's where we're collecting documents that are really used throughout the life and the entirety of the funding agreements process. For now, what should you remember about intake? It's this. It's while the funding recipient is not on the clock or on any clock to, you know, send these materials over, they can take several rounds of edits, or even take a while to collect certain things from third parties. And the important thing there is that we cannot move through the rest of the process without our intake documents. And so the big takeaway there is that intake is really the key phase where the funding recipient can shorten the overall timeline to get to payments. You know, in other, as you can see, in other parts of this process, things will be with us, with EDC, city law, OMB, comptroller, whoever it might be. You know, intake is largely driven by funding recipient. So that's one of the, you know, just keep in mind, that's some of the earliest engagement stuff that we'll be working with you about. And so to the extent you'll be prepared for that with a team, hopefully this presentation will help. So legal drafting, you know, once we have a good understanding of the project and have collected some intake, we're going to liaise with city law department to draft some legal documents. Please review them. Please have your outside counsel also review them. The primary documents I already mentioned are, of course, the funding agreement. There's also a declaration of restrictive covenant, which we'll call the deck. And the deck is really the main string attached to the funding, right? It's a requirement that the funding recipient will publicly record the deck on their property records. It's a promise to operate the site as a nonprofit organization for a public purpose. And what do I want you to remember about legal drafting? At this point, it's that really the city considers these forms to be, you know, form documents that are not really subject to major changes. So you'll work with your attorney, you'll work with city law, but in the end, OMB is going to also have a chance to review, and they'll look at changes to the forms, and they may not approve. And so rather than spending, you know, months negotiating terms that end up being sort of reverted, we would recommend that, you know, speaking to attorneys about suggesting that there are really only really necessary alterations to our forms, and that also can help get us through legal drafting, the legal drafting phase much faster. I'll note one other sort of standard legal draft that may or may not apply to your project. It's called a subordination agreement. If the project site has a lien on it, those liens would have, like most often a mortgage, those liens would have to be subordinated to the deck. So essentially saying that the benefit of the deck, once recorded, is you know, the city, and the benefit accruing to the city is in the first and highest priority position. So next, I'm going to group these two together, pre-CP and CP. That stands for certificate to proceed. We'll take our intake documents, we'll take our legal drafts, we'll send them to OMB. They'll look at the scope of work. They'll look at what the city is being asked to pay for. They'll compare your project and these submittals, to the original cap grants application, because really it shouldn't change much. You know, there's some stuff around the edges is one thing, but you can't apply for funding to replace your roof and then say, you know, well, we want to use this money building instead. So once the certificate to proceed is issued, we want to be able to execute your funding agreement contract as soon as possible. And so to that end, during the OMB reviews for CP, we will be working with the funding recipient to collect compliance documentation, procurement documentation, some of the stuff that's needed to execute the contract. Execution can take 2 to 4 weeks, I would say. And then we will basically send the executed contract and some other materials to the Office of the City Comptroller, and they have 30 days to send questions or to determine whether to register the funds. Of course, registration, you may be familiar, it's really the key approval, because it means the funds will be available for my organization, EDC, to make payments. Another note just about registration and sort of getting to that really important milestone of having the funds registered. If you're considering an acquisition project, many times groups can bridge the city funds and purchase the site, and then you'd be reimbursed by EDC. But if you will be relying on the city funds at your closing, then I would just say, like, after registration is really the best time to begin planning and scheduling the closing, because if again, like, we need to have those funds available. So it's can be a little tricky to time a closing without knowing that the funds are there. Contract effectiveness, what does that mean? It's really that the funding agreement becomes effective once you record the deck and any subordination agreements. You'll also have to purchase title insurance. I think Amy went over that at one point, to ensure the priority of the deck's benefit. And once we've got the contract is effective, the funds are registered, finally we're able to sort of make payments. So again, to be reimbursed, you'll have to pay for completed work. Remember, it must be at prevailing wages for your construction projects. Send your EDC project manager a request for reimbursement that shows that the work was done. You've made the payment, and certain parties have released the future claims. So that's sort of the overview of the funding agreements process. I also want to touch on some important considerations. So a few of these things. I think one of the interesting things about funding agreements is that really this process we just talked about is really detached from the project you're managing. So just as an example, you could complete your entire project. You could build a new building on a vacant lot, and only after the whole thing is up, then start to send a narrative and a budget and stuff like that and start this funding agreements process. That's extreme. Either the reverse is true. Usually it's somewhere in the middle. Talk to your project manager about where you are in the process here, because if you're spending on project, you're spending on your project for things that you want the city to reimburse you for, just again, remember that until the funds have been registered, that is considered working at risk. And it's something we can work through and discuss. Some projects we like to flag here because they're city funding. We'll go through could be lengthy environmental review. You may even need to hire an environmental consultant. That's something your project manager will communicate early. If you have a construction or renovation project with at least $3 million of city capital funding in it, we're going to connect you with a MWBE team member, minority and women-owned business enterprises, essentially to help set participation goals on the overall project cost, so that a percent of the overall project cost can hopefully go to some certified MWBEs. Lastly, sort of procurement and compliance. The funding agreement is going to refer to something called first-tier service providers, which is defined here, basically somebody who's in direct contract with the funding recipient and whose work you are expecting to be reimbursed with city funding. They must be competitively procured, and they will also have a similar compliance requirements like the funding recipient. Insurance is a typical one, passport, enrollment, and of course, we're going to, like I said, checklists and templates galore throughout. So just taking one last look at required documentation for intake, narrative and budget are our key ones. And I'm going to step back here and just talk to you a little bit about how long this can take. Essentially, appropriations are made on July 1st. There's some time that we spend with OMB to finalize the list of new projects that we'll be managing. You'll expect to probably hear from EDC in August, asking you for a preliminary narrative and budget. Again, there might be some clarifying questions. We'll assign you a project manager at that point, get things kicked off with checklists, site visits, understanding, learning about the project and the organization. But these things that you're seeing on the screen are really the first sort of deliverables that we'll be asking for, and hopefully that gives you a little preview of some of the things that we'll need, and you can even see why in some cases it may be can take some time to pull these things together. So yes, I hope again to get to work with some of you soon. Good luck with your process and applications, and I'll step back for our general Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Much appreciated. Thanks so much for walking us through your process. This is Amy again. I had to having technical difficulties, so I had to hop over to Maite's computer. But thank you to all of our agency reps for just kind of sticking around for another little bit here while we try to run through the questions that have been dropped into the Q&A section. And I see some of them have already been answered. So if you've dropped a question in, take a look and see if the answer's already been put in there. But I will run through some of the outstanding ones. And my OMB friends, if you want to hop in for any of the questions that are more kind of technical related, please do. I think I can answer this first one though, which is under which category do elevator repairs fall, which is construction renovation, correct? Looks like there were a couple other questions. So that's real property, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
That
very
would be correct.
good. Next question is a parks community garden considered contract property to qualify for capital funding? Parks community gardens are usually located on parks properties, so those are considered, for our purposes, a city capital request because you would be requesting the capital on behalf of the Parks Department since it's their property. In which case you would want to talk to them directly to make sure that they approve what you're asking for funding for, since it is their property. But we get these requests every year, and several of them every year. So hope that helps. Next one is for tree beds. Street trees are technically on city property. That's correct. Would this make maintenance on tree beds not eligible? I don't know exactly what you mean there. If you mean tree guards, if you're wondering if you could request money for tree guards are capitally eligible if they are requested as a part of a new street tree planting. But this question, maybe you should reach out to us over email because I'm not entirely sure what you mean. But if we talk about it a little more, I could probably be able to help you more. Okay, please confirm that if our organization has not previously received a programming grant from the Borough President's Office, we are not eligible to apply. When I said city contract funding, that means from the Borough President or council discretionary funding or any other city operating contract. So it doesn't only have to be previous expense funding coming from our office. So I hope that answers that. If there's a more specific question on that, feel free to either drop it in or, again, we can talk about it offline. If a company only has leases on all spaces, I think you mean by all your spaces, are they eligible for any capital funding from the city? Think no.
Salon.
Yeah, go ahead.
Salon.
When it comes to leasing a space, that just leasing a space should not disqualify non-city from applying for capital funding, but it depends on exactly what you are applying for. I would refer you to the ineligible items. You could check the list as well whenever that the documents are released. And otherwise, when it comes to any specific question or specifics, any specifics beyond that, it would just have to be handled later down the line after you make that application and once the OMB reviewer is looking over your application.
Sarah, maybe the next question. A nonprofit cultural institution housed in a historic landmark building. Could eligible projects include disability access, new elevator, office renovation in a landmark building? Did you hear all that?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. For a cultural institution housed in a historic landmark building, could eligible projects include disability access, new elevator, and office renovation?
Yeah, if the organization is eligible to request funding from DCLA, and I don't know if this was covered at the top, but their cultural DCLA has its own eligibility requirements, so you should definitely be checking with DCLA, the Department of Cultural Affairs, to make sure that you are eligible. So one of the baseline requirements are that you receive CDF, which is a community development funding. That's programmatic support already from the Department of Cultural Affairs. So if you're an organization that receives that funds, that makes you eligible, or if you're part of the cultural institutions group. But accessibility, those items, if it is a comprehensive project that again meets our requirements for capital eligibility, that should be fine.
And Sarah, while you have the mic, do you guys have an information session coming up?
We do.
Okay, they have
We
that date.
invite yes, an email has either gone out
Okay.
or is being put together right now.
Okay.
And we'll go out to all organizations that have the baseline eligibility. So
Great.
look out for that if you are one of those organizations.
Amy, you want me to keep going?
Sure, yeah.
The salon people can get onto once it's open, onto the website to see the historical projects. Is that correct?
No, let me actually take this one. The question was, we're on the website, because this, I think, is in response to something I said. There's a list of past grants. The question is given by OMB. OMB doesn't give the grants, and City Council. I mentioned that we have a list of some of our past projects. Those are only for BP funded projects for only a few of the past fiscal years. That's on our website in the funding section. As far as City Council, they have a on the funding section of their website, you can do a search for grants from the City Council. But again, I'm not entirely sure what beyond that, how that functions. But you should look to their website for anything City Council related. Cool.
Yep. Next question, we're going to jump down to what's the differences between EDC and DDC as it pertains to cultural organizations. Which one of you would like to jump in? And Sarah,
I mean, I can give you a sort of
sample.
a big picture answer to that, which
Yeah.
is that you probably won't know what your management is going to be at this very early stage of funding request. In terms of the differences, there can that answer can have a lot of minutia, or it can be general. The general answer is that the Department of Design and Construction hold the contracts with the design and construction teams, or EDC holds the contracts with the design and construction teams. There are a lot of different things that will make the timeline shorter in some cases, longer in other cases. It's really hard to compare the two, like in a short answer.
Okay.
But once you have funding in place, we can certainly discuss you know, the changes, the differences. And also there's a lot that goes into, like DDC will kind of takes all projects, and EDC has some of their own requirements for taking on projects. So again, it's kind of hard to answer that without knowing like what the specific case is.
Super, thank you. Amy, the next question comes up often for us.
Mm-hmm.
The split ask between BP and City Council.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Jim. When requesting funds from both the council and the BP, do you split the ask or make one request? I think it depends on the size of the request, and also this comes up a lot in individual meetings. Organizations will ask for kind of our advice, and it is easier to give the advice on a case-by-case basis, both depending on what the request is and what the dollar amounts are in question. Sometimes it makes sense to split it depending, again, on the dollar amount in question. Other times, if it's a larger ask, you know, we can give some guidance on what's a reasonable piece to ask to us, and I can give a little bit advice on the council piece as well, just because Mark also used to work in the city council, so I have some familiarity with how it used to work over there. But again, meeting, you know, talking about that with us in a meeting would be advisable.
If I could just add, separately from, you know, maybe any strategic considerations there, the physical application document in the portal, if you are requesting to, you know, a borough president and a city council member, it's just one submission. You know, there's multiple lines, so you can put that in there, so you don't need to submit twice.
Joshua, next couple of questions are for you guys. If you're building a pharmacy inside a building, is that a real property application? Are you guys unmuted? OMB. If you're building a pharmacy inside of your existing health center, would this qualify as a real property application? Sounds like a yes, Elon.
Well, Joshua, do you want to take this? I feel
I
feel like it.
more detail. I mean, you know, the use would have to still, you know, be the nonprofit use. Building or if it's determined to be a city purpose, and it's just a construction within the health center, then on that, you know, potentially yes, it would just be a real property project.
Okay. And in the interest of time, we're moving along. We can always answer more questions later and offline. Here's another big question. MWBE, are those required for all projects, EDC projects, DCLA? Is that a general requirement, Zalon or Joshua? MWBE goals and requirements.
Sure. So what I'll also want to hear from Sarah about the DCLA piece, but if EDC is the managing agency and it's a construction project with 3 million or more of city capital, then we will set the MWBE goals. So it's with using like city certified firms through SBS. That's it.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Sarah.
I don't know if DCLA, just as the funding agency, we don't really have our own rules around this, but I think we defer to, I think it's local law 1, I believe, right, which sets MWBE goals. So we expect that whichever managing agency the organization is working with will set those goals. So as Josh was just talking about, EDC will set their goals, and I believe DDC defers to the law in place around that.
Okay. Salon, the next question, small nonprofit that just signed a new, where did that question go? A new lease for 5 years. Are we eligible to apply if we rent? That depends on what the application is or what they're requesting, Zalon.
Yes, it very much so depends on the application.
Generally, if we rent, go ahead.
When it comes to like equipment projects, let's say, the useful life, we would want that to be at least 5 years. So I think in pretty much most, if not all cases, just 5 years at this point. If you've just signed a new lease, you would want to work on getting an extension for that lease just prior to applying for any project. If anyone else wants to add to that, please go ahead.
So next question, does your interest on the lien mean you co-own or have an interest financially in the property? That has a little bit to do with the subordination questions, Alon.
Um,
Do you co-own the property or have an interest financially in the property?
I'm not fully understanding the question, Joshua.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you understand it better than I do.
Maybe. I mean, potentially, because we sort of think of it as a use lien. And my answer, with my understanding, is the answer is no. I mean, we certainly don't co-own the property. It's not a financial lien or mortgage. Sort of the extreme, like default scenario is like finding a nonprofit to take over the space and use the improvements for the duration of the rest of the useful life. So that doesn't happen very often. It's really the commitment, right? And that's the purpose of the deck to in exchange for the city capital, they'll be using the project area for the public purpose.
Yes, that's correct.
Amy, just for the interest of time, do we keep going with the questions or how would you like to?
Let's do maybe 5 more minutes, I
Go ahead.
think.
Go
So
ahead.
if you want to
Take over.
just, you want me to take over? Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
just so you can close.
Okay. This next one and the qualification side. Okay, this is for us. The second bullet point mentions having a contract. Can you explain or provide an example? So I think what you mean is talking about the expense contract or the expense contract requirements, which means that if you're going to request funding for capital improvements or capital equipment, you need to have existing expense contracts, which means, say, you have a contract with the city to run a social service program. That's programmatic funding, or you get city council discretionary dollars to support programs, again, on the expense side. That doesn't make sense. Definitely feel free to set up a meeting or like a quick phone call for us, and I can help walk you through that. Let's see. Can schools apply for capital? Yes, that's the schools application. We did a separate webinar on that. Excuse me. So if you want to take a look in a couple days, we should be posting a link to that on our website. What is considered a capitally eligible lease? Must it be 10 years or more? OMB, can you elaborate on that one a little bit? The longer the better, I think is what we generally say, but
If you are just looking to do a construction renovation project, then
looks like they are, yeah.
yeah, then it would have to be at least 10 years from what is it? It would have to be at least 10 years from, I believe, the substantial completion of the construction / renovation. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm just kind of running through some of these outstanding ones. Does your project have to be shovel ready to apply in this round? Again, it depends on the project, but it has to be ready enough that it will be executed in the upcoming fiscal year. Did I answer that correctly, OMB?
Sorry, Amy, can you repeat that?
So I think we're having some connection issues, but the question was, does your project have to be shovel ready to apply in this round? And I said it depends on the type of application, but if it is construction renovation, the project has to be ready to be ongoing in the fiscal year in which they're applying, correct?
I would have to look into I would have to discuss that one internally and get back if they could just send an email to the elected officials and then they could forward it to us, unless if Joshua A has an answer.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any rule on that. What I would say is, there's things that happen, right? Like other priorities take over. You think that you're ready, that you're going to build starting in the winter and whatever happens. So we can work around that. And, there's a lot of planning that goes into these capital projects, especially to, make them successful. In the application, you'll be asked to itemize, provide an estimated budget. So usually there's some thought and planning that's gone into it. But as I said before, it can take a while to get to a registered and payable, point, even up to a year and a half from the point that we have like full intake. So there's not a requirement, certainly, that like you've actually gone in and, within a year and a half and started your project. Many groups choose to mitigate their risk. If it's a $2 million renovation and the city's funding 90% of it, they want to make sure that the city funding's there and are, more apt to wait until they know that they have an executed funding agreement and a registered funding agreement. So we could be working on that and doing all this for that year, and the project, the physical part of the project has not begun. So hopefully that's helpful hopefully that's helpful. I'm not aware of any like that it has to be shovel ready, but it does need to be sort of actionable or executable within a reasonable time, but each project is different.
That was helpful. Thank you. Okay, we're going to end on one last question here. And anything that we missed, feel free or we'll try to answer in a follow-up email we'll send the presentation and any other information. I think this last one is best answered by OMB. Does building security qualify? So they put specific examples: surveillance system, lighting installation, access control systems, and doors.
It likely would, if it, met, the minimum sort of qualifications in terms of cost. This sounds like a potential equipment system, potentially. But of course, with all of our answers here, it's really application dependent, and we'd encourage you to fill out the application. We'd be able to follow up with specific questions to find out more. But generally, that does sound like something that could potentially be eligible.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending. Like I said, we'll be posting a link to this webinar on our website. I appreciate all the agency reps that have joined us today and for your expertise and for sticking around to answer questions for people. I know it's much appreciated. So thanks again for joining. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye. Where do I leave? Okay.